1988. And Grandma, you're on. Go.
I'm on, huh? What am I supposed to say now?
Oh, talk about your grandpa.
What's the story of my grandpa, huh?
Yeah.
Well, my grandpa was let's see, he was the 10th of 13 children in his family. He had 13 children in the family. He was the 10th one. He had a brother and 2 sisters younger. And they lived they was Pennsylvania Dutch, and they originally came from Germany to begin with. But they settled, the ancestors settled in Pennsylvania, and then they drifted over into Ohio. And he was born in Columbus, not in Columbus, but close to Columbus, Ohio. Little outskirts village out. Oh, there's a name, Bevelheimer Lane, out there where they used to live at the present time now. And they was raised on a big farm out there, and they lived in a big stone house that was built out of stone. And my grandfather was raised there until he was about, I guess about 18. He didn't get along very well with his father. Him and his younger brother was always into some sort of mischief somehow, and it always, my grandmother said, always started on him. So they didn't get along too well, so he'd work around for the farmers there and kind of saved a little money, and when he got to be 18 years old, why, he left home. I just up and left home without just what little he had saved, and he took a ship, I don't know where, just as close, I guess, as from Ohio as he could get to the seaport. I never did hear him say where he got on the ship at. They sailed down and out, down around through the Panama Canal. At that time, the Panama Canal wasn't through. It was only about halfway across. And they had to go the rest of the way through by wagon. I suppose it was covered wagons that they had. He said it took about 3 months to go across. And some of them that was bound for the west coast died on the way. They all didn't make it across. But he said it was terrible rough going across there, and the mosquitoes and snakes and all that stuff, you know. It was just through the wilderness, like he said, to get through. But he got through over on the west, and then they took another ship up to San Francisco. He debarked at San Francisco. Stayed there a little while, and he didn't care for a big city like that. So we went on up to Astoria, Oregon. That's at the mouth of the Columbia River.
And stayed around there a while, and he was a pretty good carpenter.
In those days, they called them joiners. Join things together, lumber together, so they called them joiners. But he was a carpenter. And so he stayed around there, and he worked. He didn't have any job that was available. Why, he'd work a while. That's the way and he said he got acquainted with a fellow, and it was an older man he got acquainted with, and he told my grandfather, he says, now he says, let's just take up a homestead here, he says, and we'll build a cabin on it, he said, and you, right across the dividing line of the 2 places, they take up 160 acres or something, and they built a cabin that would go across the line, and he'd live on one end, and my grandfather lived on the other end. And he said, then we'll prove up on it, and we'll each have a piece of land.
Now it would be right in the square middle of Portland,
where this place was. He said, though, it was all great, huge, big trees, and my grandfather, of course, was just young, and he didn't want no part of that. No, sir, he'd come all the way from Ohio and out there, and he was going to see the country. That's what he come for, that's what he's going to do. So he worked here and there and all, and he went along, roaming along, and he went up to the Dalles. That's on north on up to Columbia from Portland, and there was lots of Indians around in the country at that time. They were still hunting, he said, for them Whitman girls that the Indians had stolen. But he didn't get in on that, but he could mingle around with the Indians some, and got so he could talk a little to them, and he said it was an old Indian he got acquainted with, and he'd go into his wigwam that he had there, and the old Indian would tell him stories about the Indians, and he told him that, he said, now, there used to be, he said, a bridge across the Columbia River. And he said the mountains got into a big fight, he said, and the bridge fell down. He said he could remember going across there with his mother when he was a boy. He said, I guess the old Indian was 100 years old. He was a very old man. And he was telling him that, so he said there was trees on this bridge that went across and all of that. Well, there is a place up on the Dalles now that they call the Bridge of the Gods, where they have a bridge, a steel bridge goes across there now, but it's called the Bridge of the Gods, and it was at one time really true that there was a bridge across there, a natural bridge. So he stayed around up there for a while, and then he come back down to Portland and started down, but he'd worked around, saved his money, and he got a pack horse, a horse that he could ride, and so he rode horse down. And at that time, down through the Willamette Valley, down now where Eugene and Salem and all those, right down through the center, there was none of that there then. There was just here and there a farmhouse or a house, and just a road, very rude road along, just wagon could go, and that was just about all. So he was coming along down there, and it got long towards night, and those people in those days, you know, if anybody come along like that, why, you'd ask them if they could stay all overnight, you know, and all, and they usually they would let you, you know, and you'd pay them whatever. So he come to this farmhouse, and he said he asked up and asked the lady if she could take him overnight, put him up overnight, and she said yes, she could, and for him to take his horse out to the barn. She said her husband was out there, take him out there, and he'd put the horse up, and then they could come in for their supper, she called it, but now we call it dinner. And so he did, and he said these people had, this woman and the husband had a couple of girls. He said he guessed they must have been about 12 and 13, 14 along there. He said they're good big girls. And of course my grandfather, in that day, he was young, and he had dark curly hair and blue eyes. He was a nice looking young fellow. And those girls, you know, he said they began to laugh to one another and talk to one another in Pennsylvania Dutch, you know. And he said never let on, you know. And he said, they just talked and giggled, and their mother tried to hush them up and they wouldn't pay attention, you know, to all to what she told them. And he said they just talked about him the whole evening to one another, you know, in Pennsylvania Dutch, and laughed and talked. And he said, come morning, and he got ready to leave, he asked their mother in Pennsylvania Dutch how much he owed her. And he said, you never saw such, the girls get out of there so quick in all your life. And the mother said, that's good enough for 'em. She said, I told those girls that they was going to get caught one of these days at their smart work. She said, good enough. That's good for 'em. Maybe they learned something, she said. So that was one of his escapades that he had when he was coming down through there. So he came on down, he said, the canyons, he said, down after he got down through the, well, I guess quite a ways down, must have been the northern part of California, somewhere out through the canyons. He said he was camped over on one side, he said, and over across, he said he could hear, they said must have been a couple of wild cougars or something. Cats had got into a fight, and he said they just squalling and hollering over there. He said it was terrible, woke him up. And they went on farther down, he said, and it was lots of Indians around. They were really thick. But he said funny thing, he said the Indians, if one person was alone, they wouldn't usually bother him. They could go and they wouldn't bother him. So he said he was alone, you know, and he had this horse and he had a sort of a pack on it, you know, with, well, I guess a few things to camp, because he camped and had his blankets, you know, in a roll on the back of the horse. So he said he was stopped to camp, and he said,
Here come a couple of Indians.
and he said they just went all through his pack, and he was starting to make his camp, and they went all through that, he said, and looking and all, and finally they wanted him to go with them. Well, he said he went right along with them, and they took him, he said he don't know, maybe they went about a mile, he said, on down to a sort of a flat place along this, along kind of a river that was there. And he said there was quite a bunch of them down there, and they had a fire, and he said they had smoke sitting around it, you know, and he said they had a pipe and they was smoking it. He said, finally, he said one would get up and dance around, and then maybe another one, he said, and they come around to him to smoke the pipe, said he did, and handed it around just like the rest of them, and said it come his turn to dance, he got up and danced holler like they did, and so on. And he said they kept that up, he didn't know how long, and he said he didn't know what the world was going to come, what they was going to do with him. He didn't know, he said. But finally they said, well, he could go. So they went back to his camp, he said. There was nothing bothered. They hadn't took a thing. It was all there and everything. So he said he went on his way. And of course he got down into California, into Nevada. And he was down in Nevada, down at Flagstaff, and he was mining. Of course, it was in the 49 down in there, and where they discovered gold. So he mined down in there for, oh, I suppose he must have been down in there for a couple of years, maybe. He never said how long, but it was quite some time around in there, and around Virginia City at the Comstock lode, that silver. And he did find a pretty good mine. I don't know, but he got several thousand for it when he sold it. I know, and then he took the money, took that, and he went back to Ohio, and he married my grandmother back there. And their 3 children were born in Ohio. My 2 uncles, my Uncle Owen and Uncle Jake, and my aunt Effie, they were all 3 of them born in Ohio. But my mother and the youngest one, they were born in Missouri. They quit the farm that the father had given a piece of land back there, give him a piece of land back there, and he wanted him to stay back there, but oh, I don't know, he didn't like it, so he pulled up and started with his family and got as far as Missouri, and they stopped there and stayed, and he worked in the coal mines there, and from there on they came in a wagon on to Portland. But not Portland, Portland, and came on down to Canyonville, and then to Days Creek, and he took up a homestead at Days Creek.
And he could come out and get that,
And so he took up a homestead at Days Creek, and
right there.
by that time my mother and the youngest one, that was my Aunt Nora, And the two boys, my Uncle Jake and Uncle Owen, it was only the two boys, they were with them. But my Aunt Effie, she was still back in Missouri. She had married and she was back there. So they took up 160 acres up above Days Creek. It was about 3 miles, I think, up above Days Creek it was. 'Cause my folks, my mother, when she married, she was just about a mile below, about a mile and a half below where my grandfather's homestead was, where they lived, and I had to walk 2.5 miles to school. So it must have been about a mile and a half where this homestead was. And he built a log house. My grandfather built a log house. Had 2 rooms, fireplace on one end, and then on the, that was a main house. And he made it high enough so it had a upstairs in it. And an upstairs was made out of logs that was
Written to the middle and laid up.
made stairway. I remember when I was little going up and down them stairs. And this log house. And then he made a side, what they called a lean-to on the side of it, where they had the kitchen and all that. It was not, it wasn't too bad a place. At that, he had a lumber floor in it. It didn't have a log floor, but they had a fireplace on one end and all. And it wasn't too bad a place. One, I guess that they lived there, must have been there a year or more. And I was born in that house, that log house.
You were born in the log house that he built?
In my grandfather's log house, I was born in it, on his homestead. And my mother married when I was about, well, I don't think I was 4 when she was married, and then she moved down about a mile and a half on down below,
Down the river a ways.
where they lived. They lived in a log house too, just made out of log, because it was timber all around in those days, lots of timber.
You forgot to tell about Grandpa and forgot to tell about Grandpa and the Indians and coming to his cabin.
Oh, that one, no, that was at the Flagstaff, Arizona, where he was a mine, and then there was Indians would come. And he said, oh, there was a lot of Indians, and he said they were just thick, and he said the squaws, they'd have these old, they had lots of rabbits, and they'd get these rabbits, and then they'd make robes out of them, he said, and I guess they didn't dress them down too good. Maybe they did or didn't, I don't know. Anyway, he said, if they got warm, he said, they just stunk horrible. Well, he said, he had a cabin, and he had a stove, and it was kind of a little cook stove, and it made heat too, and was kind of in the middle of the cabin. And he said, oh, it must be awful cold out, just freezing below 0 and cold. And he said, pretty soon, he said, he'd hear a rap on the door, and the Indian would say, whitey man, oh, heap of cold, whitey man, in. So he said, open the door, and he said, that one. He said, wouldn't be very long. He said, till there'd be another rap on the door, and go away, he'd say, go away. No, whitey man, she'd say, oh, whitey man, my sister, he'd be cold, Oh, he let her in. He said that would go on, he said, till there'd be 6 or 7 in there, he said, and they'd just huddle around that stove, he said, and they just stunk so bad you couldn't stand it, and then he'd run them all out, the whole bunch. And then, too, he said, those miners, you know, they all wore those red flannel underwear, drawers, long-legged drawers, and be red. And he said, I don't know the mayor, but the ones that run the city or the town there, the judge and some more, he said, was standing there at one of the cabins where along the street, what kind of a street it was, not much. And they were talking to this old Indian. They called him Old Indian Bill, or I think, and he was coming along. And some of the miners had give him a pair of them drawers. And he said the whole seat was out, you know, his whole seat was sticking out. That's the reason they give it to him, of course, but he had them on and his whole seat was out. So he come along there, and one of the men told him, he said, oh, Bill, or whatever his name, he said, does your, I think it was a judge that asked him, he says, do your butt get cold? No, no, he said, your face get cold? He said to him. Oh, no, he said, my face get cold. Well, he says, my butt all same your face. So, that, one of his scrapes he had, so he was always a mine, and after he was in his 70s and still lived up there in his home at Dave's Creek, he was always mining. There was a creek that came down, several, I guess 5, 6, 8 miles on up the river that come down. They called it the Shively Creek. And it was come kind of down through a steep canyon where it was steep on both sides. And he was always finding traces of gold in the
bottom of the creek, you know. And he figured that gold must come from somewhere, which it did come from somewhere.
But he was trying to trace out where that gold could come from. And he was always going over there, you know, and mining around here and there and getting samples of gold here and looking to see if he could find the main source of the gold. Well, and he usually didn't never carry any firearms of any kind, you know. He had his pick and he had his mining pan usually, and he had all the stuff he couldn't carry anymore really, and didn't bother to carry it anyway. So one time he went up on a Shively Creek, and he said he was coming around a ridge, around a mountain, kind of around a mountain, and he run right into, he said, a patch where
It was just lots of hair and stuff, and he said
there was a couple of little
baby
mountain lions there, cougars they called them. And he said, oh, he said, I got away from it. And he said, I looked up there and he said, there was the old mother right above. And he said, she was down there and looking at me. He said, I got away from there just as quick as
I could run down the
ridge. And he said, I come to a little ravine where there was a big log across. Oh, he said the log must have been 5 foot across. It was a huge log. And he said it just fell across this little gulch, and he said it was hollow underneath. And he said the old lion was coming after me. He said, and I just ducked under that log and laid there in that hollow. And he said she just jumped up on the log. She said he reached around, she would one way and try to reach me, and he said I slid over, and then she'd get over on the other side. He said, slid over that way. He said that went on. He said, I don't know, quite a little bit. And he said up on the above up there where the babies was, they got into some kind of a squaw.
What kind of scrapes he got into.
Did I pause? No. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong button.
Well, you can plug in.
Okay, here we go with some more about Grandpa Beebleheimer. What was it?
That's a picture of my grandfather, Charles Beebleheimer. He picked up that homestead up on Days Creek, 160 acres. And my 2 uncles were young men. And they would hunt these mountain, they call them mountain lions, and some call them cougars, but they're big cats. And they had an old dog they called Old Dude. He was a kind of a brownish color, and he was part hound of some kind. And they would hunt these, it was timber, big timber all around. And there was lots of deer, and of course had to be a lot of deer.
There was a lot of these mountain lions around then. And they would hunt these mountain lions, and there was a bounty on them, you know, and that would help to buy groceries if they could find them. So they would hunt for these mountain lions, and
take this old dog and he'd tree 'em. Put the lions up a tree, and usually it was night when he'd get 'em, go hunting. And he'd tree these mountain lions, and they just sat, it was too dark to shoot, you know, they couldn't see. So they just set the gun down by the tree, maybe put the coat down there, and the old dog would lay down there and he'd keep that cougar up that tree all night, till daylight, till they could come back and shoot him. He was a smart old dog, I'll tell you. They killed many, and they said they killed, now of course that was before my time, but I heard them telling about that. They just killed, a bunch of mountain lions in there then. Because it was just wild country, that's what it was.
We're from wild country, and it's
Right along the South Umpqua River, and it was quite a good.
Short stream, the South Umpqua is.
so.
You were saying that you couldn't imagine how you'd gotten to school because there was no roads or anything.
Well, just a path, just
Wound right along, up and down.
through the woods and along. Oh, and I didn't start till I was 8 years old because, well, I couldn't, walk by myself. Went by myself a little, and I was small for my age. I was always tiny. And there I was. It's a wonder to me that a lion or something didn't catch me. I didn't seem to be much afraid, though. There was only one spot that I can remember where I was afraid. And that was right through where there's some big, tall timber, and it was thick and kind of up on the ridge line. And I was kind of afraid at that one spot, and I'd hurry to get through. I don't know why I was afraid there, but I was. But now I walked to school by myself there until I was, I didn't get anybody else to go to school with me till, well, I must have been, well, it was before my brother was, I was 4 years older than he, and of course when he got 6 years old, he sent him to school. But I think just before he started, there was a family moved in about a mile on up from them, and they had a girl about my age. She was a little bit younger, but about my age, and she went to school. And then I had a partner that went to school with me. And then, of course, my brother and sister come along, and they got old enough to go to school. So then there was
A bunch of us to go together.
But there we was, walking, and by the time my brother and sister got old enough to go to school, it went along after that till
The neighbors,
all of them got together and they made a road that they could drive the wagon and the horses by. I have a picture of the crew that worked on the road in one of my books at home, of that bunch working on the road, putting that road through there.
I'll have to look at it sometime.
Yeah, it
is something to get that road across on that side of the river.
Now they've got a nice road up through there, all paved and everything. See?
Progress.
Yeah. I can remember we lived across the river from the main road, went over across the river on the other side. And I don't know if you ever was up there or not.
And I pointed out to you where I used to live.
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
I remember being at Tiller. Is that where you're talking about?
Yeah, no, that was Tiller we was way below Tiller. We was just 2.5 miles above Days Creek. And Days Creek's about
We didn't know much many people up around Tiller.
You didn't go much in those days because you just had the wagon, and maybe you had a light wagon. It wasn't a farm wagon, a light wagon that you could put an extra seat on. And then that's the only way you had to go was with horses. And
that was a long ways
for horses to go in those days and over a rough road besides. So you didn't go off and visit very far. You visited right around close. So I tell you, but then that's where I got my education, and the old schoolhouse still stands there. Just a one-room schoolhouse. And it was a fairly good sized building. I don't know, not big either, But when I was up,
I guess I was about up to the
6th or 7th grade again,
I was about 6, I guess.
they put a petition through, got more kids then, and put a petition through the middle, and they divided the kids. The little ones over in the one far end, and the high school, or the big ones over in the other end. Divided them.
They got too many, and then they had 2
Teachers. Well, the teacher I had was a man teacher. He was an awful smart, good teacher, and I liked him, and he was really good and fair and all, and he taught
It must have been the 6th, 7th, 8th,
and 9th and
to the 10th.
grades. They freshmen and sophomore they call them now, but they call them 9th and 10th thing. So he taught that, and of course that's as far as they went, and that's as far as I got in school. But when you got through there, you knew more then than they do now when they get out of high school. I knew more and could do more arithmetic and things like that, and had more of a stable education than they do nowadays. And all those children in one room, of course there wasn't very many of us. Now in my class I think there was 4 children. And in the other classes there wouldn't be maybe 5, maybe 2, whatever. See? But we all had to study in the same room, all of us.
While one was studying,
Their lessons.
The others was studying, and one was up there reciting. They'd be called up to recite and get their instructions, maybe on the blackboard or whatever. But the ones that wasn't in that class,
they get studying all manners.
I remember many times I'd be just so busy on whatever I was there, studying away, and they'd call my class, and I'd be so busy I wouldn't even hear them. And of course they'd just titter and laugh, to think that I didn't hear them when they'd call the class. I can remember. And the seats were not like they are now. They were long seats, long, not that long.
And 2 sat in.
2 children to a seat. You had a seatmate sit with. Oh, you didn't do any whispering and chattering. That was forbid. And you passed. Believe me, you did not pass if you did not know it. That was it. And if you didn't know it, you stayed at school till after all the rest of them was gone and got it. You could walk home by yourself or whatever. It didn't make no difference. You stayed and got your lesson if you didn't work and get it.
No bus ride or nothing like that. It didn't make any difference, you see.
You had to stay. Oh, I can remember that there Palmer method of writing. Yes, sir.
Hold your pen a certain way.
Right.
I guess you must have had half an hour of that every day. You learned to write so you could read it.
It wasn't like one of the teachers said.
One of the girls was going to, I don't know, and she said, one of the kids didn't write very good, and she said, I got no time, she says, to work.
Just do more.
She couldn't read the writing, and
It's not like it is today.
Yeah.
yeah, times she had to work puzzles. She had to read it, make it over, read it over, make it over. Believe me,
You got so you could write in those days. So, I don't know, things have changed so, and I can remember
the first automobile I ever saw.
Model T, I guess it was, and we lived over across the river, and we could look over on the main road that went over along on the other side. We could look over across and see the wagons and what have you going along, This mail was carried by what they called stage. I think it had 4 horses on it, if I remember rightly. And it carried some passengers and mail, and it went from Riddle, where the railroads come to Riddle,
But got the mail in Riddle.
and carried it up.
to what they called Milo now, what was Purdue then. They called it Purdue. And then back again it went. Over that, just a dirt road, and if they got too big a deep hole rut in it, they'd come along and put a little gravel in maybe, and then go on. That's the way it was. Rough going. up and down and through, you know. Oh my.
Where you started about your first car.
Well, I don't know. We didn't know anything about it. I've seen it. It was quite a stretch along, you know, that you could see it.
It was all open. It must have been.
I guess a couple of miles along there, we could see the road from where we lived. And we was always, could always see across, and we seen it coming, of course, it looked different than anything we ever saw. There it went, and we watched it go along. I did all the way as far as I could see it from the first time I seen it going along. It must have been a Model T, and it didn't have any top on it. It was going along, and it went, well, it didn't go any faster than the horse and wagon could go.
Along about that speed.
Well, it couldn't go any faster because the road wasn't permissible. It was so rough that something like that couldn't go any faster.
What'd you think of it?
Oh, it was quite a sight. Of course, we knew about cars and all that, you know, beforehand, and we knew what it was when we seen it. It was quite a sight. See that first car going along. Well,
And his wife, and they had took their niece when she was just a small.
well, I guess she was just a baby. Must have been. She must have been 3 or 4 years old, I guess, when her mother died, and so her mother's sister took her to raise. And we all called them Aunt Susie and Uncle Frank, and they lived about a mile on above us. She was the first one that come to go to school with me, and she was the first one that I had company with. So Uncle Frank, he went, I don't know, after he was up there a while, he put in a sawmill up there then. And he sawed rough lumber. And so, and finally he bought an old, I think it was
An old Franklin.
automobile. Had them old hard tires on it all the way around and no top on it, but I think it had 2 seats, front seat and the back seat. Or something. And he'd drive that, and the wheels was high, you know, them old high rubber tires, hard rubber, just like a wagon wheel almost, but with rubber around. And he could drive that over that roadway they built. I tell you, it was some roadway too. And
Think of it now, I think, oh my.
how'd they ever get over it? And it went around a rocky point to drive, just barely around. We were very happy and all had a good, and no, nobody else did either, much, so it was all the same boat, I'd say. It was fun.
Oh,
Well, the year I was born, shouldn't I? Well, anyway, when I was born on my grandfather's homestead in this old log house, cabin that he had. The cabin had 3 rooms and that
side shed they built on the side.
for the kitchen and the dining area. And they had 2 bedrooms and the big room where the fireplace was. And then it had what they called a loft, but it was an upstairs and extra beds up there in that. So that's where I was born, in this old log house. I can remember, and I was awful small kid for my age, little, and my hair was just long, was quite long and gold, just a gold color. Not white but just gold. Gold, I have a piece, I guess it's about maybe 4 inches long that Mother cut off of my hair, and I still have it. A piece of my hair when I was about 4 years old.
Now, Grandma, I don't ever remember seeing gold hair.
Well, it was a sort of a yellow, gold color. You know, it wasn't light. You couldn't call it light. It wasn't that, but it was just gold. Of course, when I was born, it wasn't that color. When I was born, it was dark. But you see, babies lose their hair, and then it comes in light. Usually it comes in light, and then it turns dark as they get older. So when it come in light, and it grew, you know, how long it got to be. Well, the piece I have, it's about 4 inches long. It mother cut out somewhere and tied a little piece of thread or something on it. I still have it. Piece of my lock of my hair when I was at it. So it's a kind of a, wasn't light, real light, but a kind of a yellowish golden color. When I was 4 years old, and I was little. I was awful small for my age. My sister, when she was 6 years old, she was as big as I was. That's just how small I was.
How old were you when you were 6 years old? When she was 6?
I was 12.
She was as big as you were?
Yeah, she was a big girl anyway.
Got
I know
big in
Aunt
that,
Zeffie.
didn't it?
Did you know Aunt Zeffie?
Yeah.
Well, she was a big girl anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
And when she was 6, why, she was as big as I was. Because I was so little. And my Aunt Effie, I'll go back to when I was a little girl. And my grandmother, mother lived with them till I was, well, till I was 4 years old. She married Tiller when I was about 4. And she said she wanted to get me away from my grandmother. You know, my grandparents, oh, I was such a darling little thing. Oh, I could never be spanked or nothing. I can remember, now you say kids can't remember. I can remember going to the table there,
And my grandfather and grandmother and
my mother and one of my uncles were still there around the table. And I was, I must have been pretty near 4. My mother was still there and she wasn't married yet. And I wouldn't eat any potatoes unless I could have the brown ones. Right? Mother would say, you'll eat what? All of them. Grandma would say, no, she don't have to. She don't have to. And she'd pick out all the brown ones and give to me. Well, and then I wouldn't eat the bread, only the crust. I had to have them. Yeah, grandmother picked. And mother, she wouldn't allow mother to lay a hand on me. You know, I'd eat a paddling every once in a while. All kids do. There, paddling, little darling. No, sir. Well, I was just getting so spoiled. Mother said that, well, she said if I'd have been left with them, she didn't know what would happen to me. Because they just, and my grandfather just as bad to spoil me. But my oldest uncle, my Uncle Owen, he had left home and went to Wyoming before that. So I can remember, I must have, that was after Mother was married and went down below, and it was about a mile and a half, and I'd come up there. Uncle Owen was there, and he wanted me up there. And they had a horse, a mare that had a colt. I don't know what it was or when they bought this colt, but it was a kind of an active thing, you know. And I was little, and they didn't want me to go out and get out there where it was. You know, go open the gate and go in, because it hurt me, you know. It was just young colt. It was almost grown, as I remember. So when my
Uncle Owen come down back to visit,
he just delighted in teasing me. He'd get me up and he'd say, go put me on the coach, you know, and he'd carry me out there, and I'd just be squealing and bawling and, you know, and, I'd make grandmother awful mad, you know. She'd get after him, and he'd bring me back, you know, and I wouldn't have nothing to do with him then for a while. And he had a gold watch on a chain, you know, and he'd coax and baby me and coax me, you know, and finally I'd go to him again. And
Now he'd go.
I'd go to him again, and he'd pet me, and a while let me play with his watch, you know, and pretty soon, come on, let's go ride the horse. He'd go again. Oh, my.
Tricking you.
Yeah. Wasn't that awful? And grandmother, she put a stop to it entirely. She just couldn't stand that. Oh, dear. And it's just, that's the way a spoiling kid. I don't know. Of course, I was just a little one, and I was the only little one, and of course they did think that I was just about the I was a cute little devil, I guess.
They even got you
Grandmother wouldn't
thinking it.
let no spanking go on. Oh, no, Mother said she just ought to blistered me, 'cause she couldn't break me to wear panties. And of course, in those days, they didn't have elastic on their little panties like they do now, you know. They had little panty waist and buttons all around. Well, you know, a little kid will just wait the very last minute and they don't have time hardly to get to somebody to undo all them buttons. And so, well, she couldn't get me broken, and Grandma wouldn't let her spank me. And so there I was, and I can remember back just as plain as can be as it was today. My Aunt Effie and her family come from Colorado. They come. Of course, she was a stranger to me, and I was a timid little kid. Any stranger would come, I wouldn't have to go up to him or have anything to do with him. You know, I was timid. I'd stay back and wait, you know. So I was afraid of her, but she had 2 little girls. I think she had 3. I think she had 3 little girls. Well, I think Marguerite was the baby, just a baby. And they was a telling her, yeah, I didn't hear, of course, hear that, but they was a telling, my mother was a telling her about what a hard time she was having, you know, breaking me to wear little panties and not wet them and this and that. So my Aunt Effie, she got me. I guess the next day or so after she come, and I was afraid of her. She was a stranger, and I was afraid of her. So she got me to one side, and I can remember bringing out these little bitty panties, and I had a little ruffle around the leg embroidery or something, you know. And she says, now, she said to me, I'm going to put these little panties on you, she said, and if you wet them, she said, I'm going to cut your ears right off. Oh, that just scared the daylights right out of me, you know. I can remember going out and standing by the fireplace chimney on the outside, thinking about that. Oh, I think, I've got to watch out now, for sure. And you know, I never wet them ever after that. Ever.
About cutting them ears off, huh?
But I can remember going out there and standing there thinking about that. You know.
He's gonna cut my ear.
You say kids don't remember, but they do remember.
Something like that.
Oh my, what a time. That done it. Phew. Story would be, but I don't need you to help me, I don't think. We had an old sow when we lived on the ranch, and she was going to have pigs. But we had a pasture, you know, and she run in the pasture. The hogs won't do that. The pen, you know. But anyway, this old hog was about to have her baby, so she went over next to the fence, next to the woods, and there was bushes and there was trees and little trees and some madrone bushes all along. So she made her a nest. Great, huge pile, you know, of brush and twigs and everything. And she had her babies in there. We knew she had babies because she'd come up and you could tell, you know. She'd go across the little pasture there to feed, where we had some troughs where we fed her. Well, she just went on for quite a while, and one morning we went out to feed her, and she come, and she got part way, and somehow, I guess she looked around, those pigs was a-following her. She didn't want them, but she wasn't ready. She just turned around, she said, booka, 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 like that. And you know, them pigs just made a dive for that nest, and you never seen another thing of it. And when she got ready, she brought them out to eat. But it was, well, a week maybe before she brought them out, several days.
Tell us the sound again.
I tell you, they minded just like better than kids. When she said go, back they went.
Say bugga, bugga, bugga again.
Oh, and that's what she said to him when she turned around and seen him. She says, bugga, 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 to him.
Get back to where your nest. Yeah.
Oh, it was funny.
They went fast like a bunch of spoiled pigs.
You know, animals are smart. They're just as smart as they can be. You remember, I don't know if you remember it or not, but that whole yellow dog we had that after Prince, you know, he got so old, he had rid of him, so we got that yellow dog. You remember him?
Mm-hmm.
He'd go down to Winkleman's and guard down there, cut across, you know, he'd go to the barn, and then he'd cut down to Winkleman's and market the cars down there. Then he'd run back up through and market the ones up at the house. He'd give
Take a shortcut.
two markets. Well, him and the old cat, you know, was raised together, that kitten cat, like these would be. And, you know, they're just palsy-walsy, it was awful friendly. But the cat, she growed up, you know, and she was going to have kittens. We knew she was going to have kittens, so she went out to the barn. And it was quite a distance from the barn to the house, you know, along the path. So, he'd been missing, she had a couple of days. We knew she had the kittens out there. So, here she come one morning and the old dog started to go out, and they met about middle ways.
Up there. And she just jumped right onto that old dog's back.
And she rode him all the way to the house, and he was just yipping and howling, and she wouldn't jump off, she was just clawing. And the poor old dog didn't know what in the world had happened to that old cat. You know, they'd always been so friendly, and for her to act like that. So, from then on, he'd start to go to the barn, to go like he always did, to Winkleman's and around, and he'd think of that, and he'd go the other way, make a detour around the other direction. Oh, it was funny.
All right.
I think that name, George Buffin.
Okay, camera, can you get this? That's Aunt Sarah Buffum. I don't know if you can get this.
Sarah Buffin.
It's hard to be in two places at once. You hold this for me. Let me see if I can get it.
That's Uncle Johnny Buffin and Sarah, his wife, and Lottie, their daughter.
Oh, we definitely can't get it right there. I'm scooting up on it.
Let me get maybe the light a little better on her.
Hold on just a second, we're trying here. There we go, we got a picture of it. Tell them again who that is.
That's Uncle